Welcome back to Bookview TV. Now, this week we're talking with Rob Dubois about his very powerful new book, no pun intended, Powerful Peace, a Navy SEAL's lesson on peace from a lifetime of war. Now, Rob, when pundits and politicians say that you were in Iraq defending our freedoms, I've got a problem there. You're an ocean away, and the only part of the U.S. ever attacked was during World War II, during Pearl Harbor. I mean, of course, yes, we'll talk 9/11. Your country, though, has natural defenses that many others do not. So what does defending our freedom actually mean to you, particularly in the context of what we were just talking about in the last segment?
It's a great question. What is the protecting our freedoms? Obviously, it's not as simple as some would like it to be. Some would like it to be killing our enemies and knocking them down to eliminate threat. But as I mentioned in the previous segment about Bob Gates saying, are we creating more than we're killing? Another great quote of his is, we can't kill and capture our way to victory. Because force itself, all by itself, is a failing proposition. We cannot simply dominate the planet. Every major empire has tried to do so. The Soviets, the Russians, the Romans, the British Empire itself, trying to exercise hard power with potentially a benevolent veneer, saying, we're here to help you. You're a darker complexion than we are, so you need our help because we can help civilize you. And those empires don't exist anymore. Nowhere on the planet is there an empire like that. Many of our critics will say the Americans are trying to be an empire. We're imperial notions. I don't believe that's the case personally. I'm biased, of course, but the idea is that protection of our freedoms is so complex that it has to be an ongoing dialogue. I've heard about documents I share in the U.S. government. We talk about a living document. Okay, here's a list of our policies. Here's a list of what we'll do and our perspectives and our talking points with this particular population. But it's a living document. If we find something new, we go in and update it. We make something new happen on the spot. The same thing has to be true in the case of protecting freedoms, because if we have an actual, deliberate, physical threat, a 9/11 forming up in the United States, for example, then we can literally shoot a person and eliminate that threat at the moment. But shooting people often has negative consequences. We sometimes shoot the wrong guys, we shoot too many people, and we get people that are not supposed to be shot. And it's not as simple as shooting people or not shooting people. It's a matter of establishing a cultural, I won't use the word morality or righteousness, because those are very stigmatized terms. And many people would say, yes, we are the most moral country, or yes, we are the most righteous nation. As you and I have talked about off camera, I'm not going to go on record as saying any of these particular things as an absolute, because I don't believe it's in the general well-being, the best interest of the United States, to have illusions of grandeur about being ethnically or culturally superior to all others, because it just sets us up to be in conflict with all others. There are some tremendous cultures around the world. I've lived in a bunch of them. I would like for all of us to be respecting and sharing dignity of each other, which I think is really a foundation of protecting our freedoms. There are people that must be shot. The suicide bomber I mentioned earlier must be shot at that moment. There's no way around it. However, if we assume that every problem, well, Maslow said, if you are good at using a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. We have to have a very diverse toolkit, and that's how we lead to actually protecting freedoms. Inside the United States, preventing radicalization. You don't prevent radicalization by simply threatening people. It involves some legitimacy behind the desire.
Rob, there's so much hate in war and so much harm and loss. And in those first few chapters, I found it especially difficult to see the stories of the loss of children, families. I mean, I'm old enough to remember back to the iconic image of the young girl running naked, having been burned by napalm in Vietnam. And I get sent almost daily pictures and YouTube links. Remember one of a child literally cut in half by a blast. I can't watch the images on telly, talk about what it means to see them live. Tell me what that's like.
We're all humans first. Some of us, by God's grace, a much smaller subset of the human race, are responsible for being ready. Orwell talked about, I'll paraphrase, probably not get this exactly right, but we sleep safe in our beds because rough men stand ready in the night to do violence on our behalf. Without the rough men, figuratively speaking, then there is no security, there is no protection of freedoms, there's no safe home or neighborhood. In our small subset of humanity, there are things that have to be seen. Those things cannot be unseen, they cannot be, well, I think there probably are some very few sociological sociopaths who are okay with it. But for every human I know, including the toughest of the commandos, there's a human reaction to the things you just described. For example, the little girl or the child cut in half. So it's very, very, very difficult to see anything like that. And yet, you never can become calloused enough to have it not affect the person. That's my personal philosophy, my personal conviction. As I wrote in Powerful Peace, you described the body, mind, heart, and soul. We're whole people first. We're body and we're heart, our mind and heart and soul. We're all aspects of this. And so you see today's suicide rate of 22 per day of veterans. You see the PTSD effects lingering and being recognized for a long time. It wasn't recognized, and it's still denied. There are deniers. But so was Agent Orange. So was Gulf War Syndrome. Those were denied for, in many cases, expedient purposes. That it was important that the body in charge, the Veterans Administration or the National Administration, that they not acknowledge this or that problem because it would be too much of a liability in terms of paying out or treating it or addressing it. So PTSD is a real phenomenon. It really exists because people are really suffering in the population you're talking about, the body of warriors who have seen these things, and not only warriors. There are little kids who have seen little kids cut in half. We need to be aware of the impact on our species, and this is why you asked earlier why I bothered to write the book. I guess you didn't say that. I'm paraphrasing that. You didn't ask why I bothered, but I can phrase that. Why have I put years of my life into just getting this message out, and why am I devoting the rest of my life to continuing to evolve the message, find better ways to say it, and get it out there farther and farther until every human's been reached on it? The reason is because some of it's preventable. And where it's preventable, we must act. We have an obligation. As members of this species, in my opinion, each one of us who has any vision on what can be done to make some improvement has an obligation to drive forward and do it in the most effective way, which does not include beating down people and calling each other idiots and maniacs on both sides of the aisle, for example.
Well said. Well said. You know, earlier this year, Rob, Whit Mason came to our partner school, UWC Atlantic College, to talk about his efforts to build lasting infrastructure and change in places like Afghanistan and places around the world. And he talked a lot about the lack of understanding on our part of how sometimes we're our own worst enemy when we get into these situations. Talk about the instances you've seen of this.
Chapter 23 in Powerful Peace opens on page 87. And I'm going to quote the former director of the CIA, Stansfeld Turner. I don't think we understood the cultural, historic influences that pushed them into that position. It might have helped us ward the whole thing off if we had understood the deeper currents in the situation. And he was talking about a little inconvenience called Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989. The one constant in our understanding as an administration, as a country, as a people in the U.S. or any other place around the world, in my opinion, the one constant in our understanding is that it's flawed. We don't understand. I don't understand my wife in many cases. You hear that all the time. You hear spousal relationships. There's all kinds of misunderstandings and ignorance about the other side's perspectives, motivations, and it expands layer by layer to the ends of the planet. We talk about the Red Menace earlier. I mentioned that when I was a child, the Soviets were coming to get us. And when my father was a child, the Soviets were coming to get us. Look out, here they come. They're going to come and get us. They want to kill us. They want to exterminate us. Look at many spokespersons within the Islamic world today saying the Americans, the Westerners, or the Christians, or all of the above, want to exterminate us. They want to come and eradicate us. Many times the person saying that has a deliberate jihadi perspective, a deliberate manipulating of the truth, so that he can rally his forces, as I do in my writing and my speaking. Every person is presenting the best case he can at any time of anyone's life, whether it's a conversation over the dinner table or any of my national podiums.
Well, when we return with part 3 of our interview with Rob, we're going to dive into some of those conversations a bit further, and we'll talk about the effort that continues beyond this book to educate us all on the true cost of war when Bookview TV continues. Stay right here.